Okay, so we're approaching the Sfas Emes, which is going to be explaining an interaction of Yaakov and Esav based on a statement of his grandfather. And the groundwork is that Yaakov and Esav represent things. Yaakov represents Am Yisrael. Esav represents not only the nation and that empire which eventually becomes Edom and then Rome, leading to this fourth Golus that we're still working our way through. But Esav identifies with the spiritual force of the Yetzer Hara. That's why when it says Vayovek ish imo, that this unidentified man who wrestles with Yaakov in the Parsha is the Sar Shel Esav, the spiritual force behind Esav, and that is the Yetzer Hara. So the interactions between Yaakov and Esav are really laying the groundwork for the interactions of every individual Jew with the Yetzer Hara. Nationally, the Jewish people with different forms of opposition, to the extent that they say that Gedolei Yisrael, when they had to interact with non-Jewish authorities, whether from the government or the church in Europe, they used to review this Parsha and see how Yaakov dealt with Esav in order to prepare. So the Chidush Yarim, the Sfas Emes' grandfather who brought him up, zoned in on a very small aspect of the gift which Yaakov sent to Esav. There's a lot of ink in the Torah about the gift which he sent to Esav. Not only what was in the gift, but how it was packaged, how it was delivered, the space between each one, the psychological insight he had into what would get Esav excited about the gift. But he also tells the shlichim, tells the messengers who are bringing the gifts, he gives them dialogue. And this is what he tells them. He says, right, Vayitzav et Rishon Lemor. This is in Perek Lamed Beis Pasuk Yud Ches. He told the first group that are going to be bringing animals to Esav, he says, Ki yifgashcha Esav achi, when my brother Esav will meet you, Ushe'elcha lemor, and he will ask you, saying, Lemi ata, who are you connected to? Va'ana telech, and where are you going? Ulemi ele lefanecha, and to whom are these flocks, animals in front of you? So Yaakov isn't really saying this is just in case. He's saying this will happen. This question will be asked. And I'm going to tell you how you have to answer it. Va'amarta, and you will say to Esav, La'avdecha liYaakov, that these things belong to your servant Yaakov. Mincha hi shlucha, they are a gift which is sent. Ladoni le'Esav, to my master Esav. V'hinei gam hu acharenu, and behold, he is coming from behind us. So it seems in the pshat, just like a gift card, that came with it. You say, let him know who it came from, right? A few little compliments in there, and to let him know that this is just, the appetizer, and Yaakov himself is going to be coming after you receive these gifts. So there's a little bit of technical difficulty in what the Chidush Yarim and the Sfas Emes are going to do here. And let's not get caught up too much in the technicals, but zone in on the message. Chidush Yarim said, these questions, the questions that Esav asked, are similar to the way the Yetzer Hara learns a famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which unfortunately people are familiar with because it's said at funerals. It's said at funerals usually before they take the body out to Kavura. Akavio ben Mahalal el Omer, Akavio ben Mahalal said, right, Da me'ayin bosa, know where you came from, Ula ana tohalech, and where you're going, V'lifnei mi'ata osid litin din v'cheshbon, and who you're going to have to give an accounting to. And then he provides the answers. Me'ayin bosa mitipos rucha. You came from a tiny drop of biological matter, right, decaying biological matter. La'ana tohalech, where are you going? L'makom ofa rima v'tolea, to a place of dirt, decay, and worms. V'lifnei mi'ata osid litin din b'cheshbon, and who are you going to have to report to? Lifnei melech malchei amlochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, and this is just a fascinating phenomenon he's pointing out. The Yetzer Hara utilizes Torah. The Yetzer Hara doesn't just utilize temptations and physical things. He shows you Torah and he reads the Torah with his intonation and with his direction. So he says the Yetzer Hara asks you those questions. And what do those questions do? Imagine if you had that on your alarm clock. Your alarm clock in the morning, right? You set it for whatever, 6:30, it goes off. Da me'ayin basa, right? Know where you're coming from. Know where you're going to a place of rotting and worms. And who's going to get out of bed? You just put the cover over your head and you don't want to move. So he says the Yetzer Hara knows how to ask those questions kedei lahavi daiga va'atzvus, in order to bring a person to worry and to sadness. Okay? Now, again, historically, this was one of the shifts that the Baal Shem Tov fought for. There was a style of the Magidim, of people who would go around, they called them itinerant preachers. They would give drushes. This was before Netflix. So people at night, you finished your day of work. So they would put up a sign and there was a drusha and shul. And there were rabbis who went around making their living giving these drushas. And the form that they usually took was telling you how bad you are and how much you're going to suffer because you're so bad. You're bad, you're ignorant, and you're going to pay for it. And this was destroying people. And the Baal Shem Tov fought against this very much, against this trend, and took an entirely different style. He says, because the bottom line of this is daiga va'atzvus. Okay, now he's going to return in a little bit as to how the proper way to read it is that it's inspiring and not depressing. But, he says, the questions that are being phrased here in the Torah from Esav are similar to the Yetzer Hara's reading of that Mishnah. And here's how they go. He asked, Lemi ata, right? Who are you? Right? You're a little schnook, right? You have no power. Spiritually, you're a midget. Physically, you're not much of anything. Right? He asks, Lemi eila lefonecha, la'ana tohalech. Where do you think you're going to get to with what you're doing? Right? Lemi eila lefonecha. Right? These things you have in front of you, meaning your mitzvahs and such, what do you think is going to become of those? Do you think they're worth anything? Okay, so he says, Yaakov Avinu was coaching us, each of us, how to answer. He said, you have to strengthen yourself and answer those questions. Yaakov says, you don't know who I am. It's true. If I were alone, I'm part of Avdecha Yaakov. Every single Jew is part of not only every Jew in our generation, every Jew that ever was and every Jew that will be. That's the concept of Klal Yisrael. When you're looking at me, you're right, I'm insignificant myself. But do you realize what I'm part of and who I'm part of? That's La'avdecha Yaakov. He says, Al Yedeya Bitul L'Klal Yisrael Shechavivin Lafanav Yizbarach. Meaning, if you decide, Bitul is a very hard word to translate, okay? Because usually they translate the word Bitul as having to do with nullifying, right? It sounds like something the bad guys do to you in a science fiction book or something. Put them in the nullifier. It doesn't mean that you nullify and you become nothing. Bitul is more, the fancy English word that would fit is to be subsumed, meaning to become part of something much bigger, okay? And therefore, every Jew who is part of that, when the Esav / Yetzer Hara asks, who do you think you are? You have an identity that's not limited to just you, but your identity is what you are part of. And therefore, he says, Klal Yisrael is always chavivin lafanav yizbarach. If I connect myself to what's called Klal Yisrael, they're always precious to Hashem. And therefore, no matter who I am, no matter what I am, the very fact that I'm part of that makes me special. Now, when he asks, what is this that you're bringing, right? In the Pshat, he's asking about this gift. You say, mincha hi shlucha. It is a mincha which is sent. Now, the word mincha is a unique word for a gift. Mincha also corresponds to a korban. The korban mincha has a unique status. The Torah introduces the korban mincha, which is the flour offering, flour and a little bit of oil, with the phrase nefesh ki yakriv mikem. No other korban gets such an introduction. When your soul, or one of the souls of Am Yisrael, brings this korban. So Chazal say, why that introduction? Because the person who brings a korban mincha has nothing more. It's called minchat oni. It's called the korban mincha of the poor person. Chazal also refer to it as the korban of dalei dalut, the poorest of the poor. And you have to imagine, right, in the Beis HaMikdash, there were certain korbanos that were called the korban olev yored, that the type of korban you brought depended on your financial status. A wealthy person would bring an ox. A person with less money would bring a sheep. Other people would bring birds. And the poorest of the poor would bring a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil. So you imagine that person standing on line in the Beis HaMikdash. There's a guy there, right, with an ox this big. Another guy's got a lovely sheep, right? Somebody's got a cage with a few nice birds, and you're standing there. Somebody say, what are you standing here for? I'm bringing a korban. Yeah, but where's your korban? I got it. I don't see any korban. Where's your korban? So he pulls out a little plastic bag of flour. He says, okay, that's my korban. That's all I can afford. That's it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, because he brings from that little that he has, that's the most precious of all. He's actually bringing himself. Right? In many ways, we'll just connect it to a fascinating parish on a disturbing Mishnah. Some people who are doing the Mishnah Yomis learned this recently. When you would bring the Bikurim to the Beis HaMikdash, you would bring the Bikurim in a basket. Okay? Now it says that the poor people used to bring baskets that were woven out of willow twigs, arava twigs. The wealthy people would bring baskets that were gold-plated or silver-plated. And it says that the wealthy people got their baskets back, but the poor people with their willow baskets, the Kohanim kept those and didn't give them back. And Chazal said, that's what it says, Basar Anya, Azia Aniyusa. Poverty leads to more poverty, right? You're poor, there you go. You don't even get your basket back. Okay, so in Hasidic Sfarim, they saw a different take on this. They said, a guy who's got his money, and he's preparing to go to Yerushalayim to bring his Bikurim. So he goes to a jeweler, a silversmith, a goldsmith. He says, I want a basket that's going to make a statement. I want a basket that everyone's going to be talking about when I come to Yerushalayim. Right? I want little towers on it. I want little golden birds. I want all sorts of things on there, a crown. And he gets that basket. And he comes, and he brings it. You know, he's making sure that everybody gets the pictures. Hashem doesn't want that basket in the Beis HaMikdash. Take that back. A poor person took some willow twigs, arava, and he wove it together, and he made a basket. I want those to be with the Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash. That's the way they look at that there. So that's the same concept of the Minchas Ani. Okay, so therefore, the voice that's described here, again, every voice is a meta voice. The voice of Esav is the voice of the Yetzer Hara, is the voice inside of us. Looking at our mitzvahs and seeing how poor they are in quality and quantity. It says, but nonetheless, if that's what you were able to bring, right, and that's what came out, that's so precious to Hashem. It's not the way it seems. It's seen through other eyeglasses. The last is la'adoni le'esav. Meaning, he says, al yedei avoda rabba neged hayetzer hara. Meaning, it's true, it might not look like much, but I had to fight a lot of opposition to bring out what I brought here. The force of Esav, so to speak, the force of the Yetzer Hara, the force of all these things are fighting against me. So therefore, even if what comes out doesn't look like much, it's a huge victory, right? It's something which is the victorious product of a huge battle. And choshuv lefonav yizbarach kol ma shebnei Yisrael osin af ma'at kamo harbe. And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu values everything we do, even if it's a tiny bit, just like a lot. Because there's so much more to it. There's so much more in that battle. And this has to be understood, right? No one can judge anybody else. In Pirkei Avos it says, Al tadon l'schavercha ad shetagiah limkomo. Don't judge your friend until you've reached his place. And a person's place isn't just their geographical place. It's everything that makes them who they are. Their past, their psychological and physical conditions, everything which is there. That's what makes the person. So therefore, you shouldn't be judging another person's mitzvah. There's a frightening Gemara which tells the story about Rebbe Lazar. Most Mefarshim say this is Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon, the son of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who was riding on a donkey by the river, and it says he felt good because he had learned a lot of Torah that day. And suddenly he sees an ugly man, Adam Mechur. So he says to the person, but also adding to it, he almost addresses him in the third person. Kama Mechur Hai Gavra. How ugly is this guy? He says, maybe are all the people from your town ugly like you? Maybe you come from a place called Uglyville or something like that. So this is shocking, right? That a person of that stature would speak to somebody like this. The man tells him, he says, Lech v'tomar le'uman shebra'ani. Go and tell the craftsman who made me, Eze kli mechur, what an ugly kli he made. So here Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon realized that he had said something wrong, and he says, forgive me. The guy says, no, not forgiving you. I gave you your instructions. Go tell the manufacturer that he messed up. He made something ugly. And the man was walking home, and Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon was going behind him asking for forgiveness, and the guy wasn't doing it. When they get to his town, the people came out, and they see Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon, and they start going, Rebbe, Rebbe. And he said to them, that's who you're calling Rebbe? You know what he said to me? Right? And I guess, I don't know if he told them what he said about them too, right? And they told him, still, you should forgive him because he's a big person. And here, they finish with the punchline. Chazal said, from here we learn a person should be rach kekone, flexible like a reed, and not kashe ke'erez, not hard like a cedar tree. Now, some Mefarshim apply that to the idea of forgiveness, right? That be flexible, forgive a person, don't hold on to it. Reb Meir of Premishlan explained the whole thing in this way. Again, obviously, a 5-year-old kid, we would expect to not go, whoa, you're so ugly, right? It doesn't make any sense. If imagine that the person had some type of physical deformity, why would he do that? It's Asr min HaTorah, clearly, it's Aleph Beis. What is the point of saying, is everybody where you come from ugly like that? Is it something that transmits within a city? He said, obviously he was talking about spiritual avodah. He saw a man doing some type of avodas Hashem in a way that was strange to him, in a way that he found ugly, right? Maybe he was davening really loud. Maybe he was jumping up and down. Maybe, who knows what he was doing, waving his tzitzis around like a helicopter. I don't know what he was doing, but he thought, man, that's ugly. And maybe that's the custom in your town. Is that what you guys all do? He told him, he says, you don't know my world. You have no idea of my world. You're Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon. You grew up in an environment of Kedusha, and you do your mitzvahs your way. Do you realize what I have to battle with when I try to do a mitzvah? Do you realize what memories I have in my head? Do you realize what thoughts come to torture me? Do you realize what things are there? This is what I do that works for me. That's this idea of that mincha, of this that a person brings, where it comes from inside, is what's so important about that. Now, that was what his grandfather said. The Sfas Emes himself adds on to finish off the phrase in the pasuk. The messengers were to say to Esav, "V'gam hinehu acharenu," and he is behind us, which in the pshat means Yaakov Avinu is coming. He says this can be explained talking about Hashem. Shetzarich ha'adam litchazek bazeh ki Hashem yizbarach mesayeh la'adam. We have to realize that everything we do, we start, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu can help it go in all sorts of ways. That's a pasuk in Tehillim, Lakel gomer alai. Hashem finishes these things that we start. V'ma'at she'adam matchil, the little bit that a person starts, ozer lo Hashem yizbarach sheyuchol ligmor hakol kara'oi. Hashem can help him finish it right, in ways that are astounding, right, which are there. I'll take one tiny example just from our times. The Panovizh Rav, who escaped from Lithuania really through the fingertips of the Nazis, through the claws of the Nazis. In fact, he actually traveled through Germany on his way to Eretz Yisrael. At one point in his journey, he also went by Rome, and he was in a taxi, and they say that he passed the Arch of Titus in Rome, and he asked the taxi to stop, and he just got out, said, "You didn't win." And then he got back in the taxi. So he came to Eretz Yisrael really just as World War II was starting, and he started to say, what we need is a huge yeshiva, a huge high-level yeshiva, and I'm going to make it. And people, and I spoke to people who were alive at the time, they viewed him as someone who unfortunately had a breakdown because of what he went through. Right? His wife, his children, his community, his yeshiva, everyone was wiped out. So he used to go around to shuls trying to raise money. He was asked to be able to speak between Mincha and Ma'ariv. And, you know, somebody told me after we would walk out, people would go like, poor guy. You know, he's in this fantasy world of this thing. And when he finally got a plot of land in Bnei Brak, land is not even an accurate word, it was sand, basically. Bnei Brak in the old days was some citrus orchards and these things. And he used to like take people on this tour and say, okay, here's the library, going to be a massive library, dining room, right, huge base medrash. He would go into a store that sold beds, and he said, you know, I need to buy a couple beds for my yeshiva, but give me a cheap price because I'm going to be buying hundreds. And it seemed insane, but it happened. He tried. And in ways that were beyond understanding, that happened. He was certainly a dedicated fundraiser. Many, many fascinating stories about his fundraising. They say that they asked the Satmar Rebbe once if he thought there was life on the moon. And he said, no, I don't think so. They said, why? He said, because if there was, the Panovizh Rav would have gone there and made a parlor meeting. He said, he would have gone to, there's a man I knew, I knew the man's daughter. She said that when the Panovizh Rav came to America to raise money, so he spoke in a shul, and her father was a little boy, and he was captivated by this man who spoke with such passion. And the Rav noticed a little boy paying attention during his whole drasha. So he came over afterwards and he said, did you understand my drasha? He said, I understand that you really, really need money. He said, you're the only one who understood my drasha. But it was something that happened. That's the last thing of an idea of lakel gomer alai, right? That we begin, we do the things that we have to do, we do the things that we have the ability to do. And the voices that come, the voices that say, it's nothing, it's insignificant, it's not possible, it's no good. These are the things that Yaakov Avinu wanted to present us with the answers for. Now it's interesting, the Sfas Emes finishes, and it's a theme he comes to in other places. He says, Kol ze asa Avinu Yaakov avurenu. He says, Yaakov didn't have to go through any of this. He says, Lo yatzarich lishtamish b'vchinas ani, ki ya'asher b'zchuyosav. He says, Yaakov Avinu didn't have to have this argument with Esav. Yaakov Avinu was on a tremendously high level, and his deeds were very impressive. But he wanted to do that dialogue. He wanted to prepare for the spiritually impoverished descendants he would have, who would feel bad, or that others would make them feel bad about those few things that they did. Okay, and that was the strength that he gave. Now, this brings us to a fascinating topic, which gets people worked up sometime. And you can debate it at night if you like. And I've seen the two sides of it. There's a famous statement in Pirkei Avot, right? Ezu ashir samech b'chelko. Who is wealthy? Someone who is happy with his portion. Makes sense to us, right? Because when a person says, I want to be rich, really means he wants to be happy. And if he's happy with what he has, he really has what he meant when he said rich. Does that apply to ruchani things as well? Does that apply to spirituality? Now, most people's reaction usually is, of course not. In Ruchnius, you got to be hungry. In Ruchnius, you got to feel that whatever I've done is just the tip of the iceberg and I got to do more. And to the extent of being dissatisfied with everything you do. There are some who say that, but there's a whole school of people, not just among the Hasidim, in the Beis Medrash of the Vilna Gaon also, and the Bali Musar, who say in Ruchnius there's an idea of Ezu Asher Samech B'Cholko. You should be happy with those things that you were able to do. But how's the person going to progress? Isn't the pain, the torture of the I'm no good, my mitzvahs are no good, my Torah is no good, isn't that the womb of growth and success? He says no, that's the womb of suffering and eventually leaving it. Okay, I'll bring a couple of sources for this. Reb Menachem Mendel Vitebsk, who was a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, one of the very, very first Hasidic Rebbes who came to Eretz Yisrael, and his shul still exists in Tveria by the water. So he said like this. 1 second. Yeah. He writes in a letter. He says, a general letter to my friends who are involved in Torah and Avodah, and many of you complain about machshavot zarot, that you get distracted by all sorts of other thoughts. You're not focusing in your davening and your avodah. And he says, you know what? Hitavuta sibahu agadlut shebeim sheinam smechim bavodatam. The main reason you're not there in the moment, you're not in the learning you're doing, the mitzvah you're doing, is because you're not happy with it. He says, why? Because you imagine Gdolot v'niflaot mehem. You imagine the way it really should be. Right? You call this learning, this isn't really learning. You call that a bracha, that's not really a bracha. Right? Chesed, that's not really chesed. He says it's a klal gadol b'Torah liyosamech b'chelko gam be'esek haTorah v'avoda ima'at im harbei. It is a powerful rule to be happy with what you're doing in Torah and avoda, whether it's a little or a lot. V'yeheneh mimenu. Enjoy it. Right? That sounds sacrilegious to so many people. If I enjoy it, am I not saying that I'm great? No. You don't have to realize that you're great. You don't have to realize that you can't do more or better, but enjoy the fact that you're doing something positive. Sense it. He says, because hanefesh rotzeh lehanot. The nefesh itself was created to have a pleasurable experience. The nefesh wasn't created to be tortured and depressed in the world. And mitavat ta'ava, the nefesh wants pleasure. So he says, if you're not happy in your avodah, your nefesh is going to simply try to find pleasure elsewhere. He says, you're strangling your nefesh in your Judaism by this messed up dynamic of thinking that the best statement of righteousness and really understanding Judaism is putting it down. You see this phenomenon a lot of times when people start to reconnect to their Jewish roots. In the beginning, they really love it. You talk to them, wow, I just kept Shabbat for 2 weeks straight. I love that, and they taught me how to make Kiddush. I made Kiddush last week. That was awesome. And all these things, and they're just loving it. And then they go to yeshiva or something like that. How are things? I know nothing. I do everything wrong. How am I ever going to know all the halachos? I'm probably, sinning every minute with everything I do. That's not the point of the exercise. That's not what's supposed to happen, right? It's supposed to be an exhilarating process of enjoying what you have while still aspiring to more. This is the mashal I give to it. Okay, let's say it's my wife's birthday. That already was. So I go into a jewelry store to buy something for her birthday. So I go in and they have these different kind of headless mannequins with necklaces on it or something. So I see a nice sparkly necklace and I ask, how much is that one? So I don't know if they do this around the world here, like they put it on a scale to see how much the gold weighs. So she puts it on and she says, that's 17,000 shekel. I say, okay, let's put that one on the side for a second because I'm doing a rethink and I remember my wife's other stuff much more subtle. She likes kind of more subtle jewelry. That's her look. That's how it goes. How about that one? 5,000 shekel. Okay, nice. It's still not speaking to me. Eventually we get down to something that looks like dental floss made out of gold. You know, that if you hold it up to the light, you can see it. And she puts it into a little box, and I take it home. So I can either say, yeah, I got you a present. We don't have much money, so it's this like stupid little necklace. Or I can bring it with joy. I'm bringing my wife a present. That was the one I was able to do. Does it mean that I have to convince myself that there are no nicer necklaces in the world? No, I know that they're there. Is it supposed to depress me if I aspire to want to shower her with diamonds and rubies and I can't right now, but this is what I can give her? No. The two can go together. Have joy in what you're doing while still hoping to progress and to do any more. It should be a process that builds on itself. We're built that way, like the Vitebsker said. Since we're built to have pleasure and to enjoy, when something is a pleasurable experience, you want to up the ante and make it even more pleasurable by understanding it more, by investing in it more, by doing more, and that's the way that it'll progress. A second mistake that people make is they say, I can't say that Hashem enjoys my mitzvahs, right? Because there's such poor grade, right? In other words, this whole concept, okay, I'm doing it because I have to, but it's probably not very good. Is a person able to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has tainug, has pleasure, has nachas from the things that I'm doing? Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev says, he says, Aklal, a person should know, tzorich liot onov b'chol derachav u'v'chol ma'asav. A person is supposed to be very humble, right? Not to be uppity about the things I did. V'shema tomar ba'avdut Hashem gam ken yeh onov. So you think in your avodas Hashem you're also supposed to be that humble? Chas v'sholom lomar ken. You shouldn't say like that. Adarabba, adam tzorich lomar masai shani yoseh mitzvat Hashem chashuv etzla barit barach. The mitzvahs that I do are very significant to Hashem. Hashem Yisbarach Kiviyachol Yeshlo Tainug Miyam Mitzvah Sheli Shani Yoseh. Hashem enjoys them. Because if Chas V'Sholom Ye'onav B'Mitzvahs Hashem, if you put on this false humility and say, Ma Masay Chashuv Mimel Hashem, Hashem probably hates my mitzvahs. He said, Zeu Kfira. This is apostasy. Adarabba B'Mitzvahs Hashem Tzorich Adam Leimor Masay Sheni Yoseh Ratzon Hashem Chashuvim B'nei Obareh. This is something important to Hashem. And he has tainug. And we particularly can't do the calculations as to how Hashem enjoys the mitzvahs. Because like the Rambam says, nobody knows who's a tzaddik and who's a rasha. You can't. Even if you have some app on your phone that tracks every mitzvah you do and every avera you do, and you add them up and you see, I did 23,000 mitzvahs and 17,000 averas, so I must be a tzaddik. Says no, because everything is situational. How easy was it? How difficult was it? Where's it coming from? How it relates to you? Only Hashem sees that. And in the same way, He sees that mincha. He sees sometimes that thing that you brought and where it came from. So I want to just finish with a story, an example of it that I felt very moving. It was connected to the idea of Shemitah, a few Shemitas back in the time of the Ger Rebbe, the Beis Yisrael. So most of us this year in Shemitah, we got esrogim that were distributed by Otzar Beis Din, right? Which is a way of distributing Shemitah fruit and get some compensation for the farmers. But some people really want to get an esrog that came from an orchard that was totally hefker. The owner declared it ownerless. He opened up the gates, says, people, it's Shemitah, come pick esrogim. Some people still do this. A friend of mine got some nice ones in an orchard near Beit Shemesh doing that. So there was a young boy, I believe he was an orphan, and he was from a family of Gerech Hasidim. And he had an uncle who opened up his orchard. That orchard was hefker. And the buzz among the Gerech Hasidim was that the Ger Rebbe really wanted such an esrog, one that came from a hefker orchard. So he went to his uncle's orchard as soon as the esrogim were getting ripe, and he ran from tree to tree, looking, trying to find the best esrog he could find. And then his uncle helped him clip it off the tree, and he took it, and He got online for the Kabbalat Kahal, for the hours when the Ger Rebbe would see people. And he was carrying his little esrog. When he walked into the Rebbe's office, it happened to be that day, some of his gaboim, some of his assistants, brought in a few esrogim for him to choose from. Now he took a look at those esrogim that were there. These were the Miss Universe esrogim that were there. They were perfect in every way. Shape, color, you name it. And suddenly, his esrog didn't look like much. So he tried to hide it behind his back. The Rebbe saw him. He said, "What do you have there?" He said, "An esrog my uncle was mafkir his orchard. I brought for the Rebbe." He told the gaboim, "Take those away. This is the one I'm going to use." This is the eyes of how it's seen. Right? The way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu views things, and we have to learn to view these things as well. Yaakov Avinu taught us, you have to look at the repercussions, right? This idea, this false sense that putting myself down and being sad about the poor quality of my spirituality and my mitzvahs and all these things, that is somehow holy. He says, but look at where it leads. It doesn't lead anyplace good. Realize the joy that Hashem has in your mitzvahs. Have that joy yourself in the mitzvahs. Realize that a little can be a lot. Always aspire to more, but appreciate the bits that you have, because we're all rich. Have a wonderful week all.